let's talk a little bit about Marduk.
Mhm.
When how did the Amorites shape Babylon and made Marduk their chief god? Can you tell us something about the history of Marduk, his, if I can say, evolution of being a deity, any similarities or differences with Yahweh? Things of that sort. Any additional
Mhm.
material you think it's relevant?
hmm Yeah, so Marduk, as far as I can tell, is a later development. Like I said earlier, there are some other names that come up when we're talking about the smaller kingdoms, the earlier kingdoms of Sumer and Akkad. You get Enki and Enlil being more important. You get Anu and Shemesh show up, and Ishtar is there from the beginning. Marduk is not in the oldest texts that we have found, if I'm understanding it correctly. And I think there's a reason for that. But in order to understand that reason, we need to understand a little bit of history about Babylon and how it came to be. So I'm going to kind of recap that in sort of a Cole's Note version. And I'm going to do it in a way that I think will help us understand the interaction with what we get from the biblical texts and information there. So the earliest period of Mesopotamia, if we call it properly, I guess, you kind of have two regions and two people with that are probably related, but they're separated mainly by language. Sumer has its own language, and from what I understand, is that it's very unique. It's a cuneiform language, and it's not related to anything else we have on the earth. Like it seems to be an isolated language. Akkad is very much a Semitic language. And so whether these people came from the West or another group or how they ended up there, they have a language that becomes related to the later Babylonian language, but is also related to Phoenician and Hebrew and some of those other areas that overlap. It even carries forward later when Arameans come in and we have the development of Aramaic. And the script is different, but the formology, if I'm using the right term there, the consonants that make up the words are the same, even as modern day Arabic. This is a common thing in the Semitic branch of languages, is that in a lot of the languages, for the majority of the words, your consonants are pretty well the same. There are some differences, and some places you have regional differences where a word is just completely different. But the biggest differences between the languages are the vowels and the grammar. That's probably oversimplified, but that's generally how it works. That's why Old Hebrew and New Hebrew are understandable to each other, but also things like Arabic, Neo Assyrian, which still exists today, although in very small parts, Aramaic, both the middle and bits that exist now. They You wouldn't be able to have a great conversation per se, but you could understand each other and pick these things out. And I've learned a little bit. I'm still early in that journey, but I get how they go together. And it's pretty interesting. So the Akkad people are Semitic, at least by their language. Sumer was different. Early on in the kingdom, Sumer kind of had the upper hand. And as I said, was a major city, and as these two kingdoms kind of went back and forth, that was the central place of power, or at least a major exchange. And through the history now, they kind of identified different eras of the city of Ur. And by those eras, you can kind of tell who's been in power. So you get Ur 1, Ur 2, and Ur 3 as major kind of developments in the early history. So there's a first kingdom of Sumer. Then there is a kingdom of Akkad that kind of rises up and takes over. And then the Sumerians rise again. And after that third kingdom where Sumer's in power, the Amorites come from the west and then kind of conquer the area and squash that Sumerian kingdom. This is when Babylon is founded, and at least according to the archaeological patterns, and it doesn't seem to have existed before, and the name is a little bit different, and the Amorites come over. Now, in biblical terms, we call them Amorites. In the Babylonian language, or Akkadian, they're referred to as either the Martu or the Amuru. And you can hear, even I would say Amorite, Martu, Amuru, changing the vowels, but you get the same sort of form there, right? You can hear it as you say it. And that actually means Westerner, which from a biblical Israelite standpoint doesn't make a lot of sense because they would have come from the north and the east. But from Babylon, the Amorites would have come from the west. So that's where it comes from. And I think that becomes a loan word into Hebrew later on, right? They discover them. The first sort of Amorite conquerors arrive in the area around the turn of the second millennium BC. This would have been right around the time, if you take kind of the broad middle consensus of biblical timelines, the 2000 BC, I believe, is when Abraham leaves Ur and goes the other way. So that's kind of interesting. On that timeline, around 1000 is when David's around, and in between is when you have, the Israelites in Egypt, and they come back out. So as these guys are heading east, a lot of the development of Israel is heading west, which is interesting as well. But they found Babylon and they expand, and there's a couple of generations, but then we get to a really, really important figure in Hammurabi. And Hammurabi is the most well documented person because he was very diplomatic. He was less of a conqueror and really set up the kingdom that became the old empire by maybe not diplomacy, but a lot of statescraft. He documented things, made deals, and he's famous, of course, for the Code of Hammurabi, which we still have because it was etched onto very tall stone pillars, and it was a civil code, sort of a legal code. There was some punishments and stuff, and retribution written into that, but it was really a collection of probably of the laws or norms that were going on at the time, and he formalized all that so that it was very stable for the period. Why this is all important is, like I said before, you can hear the similarity in the names, especially because Akkadian Babylonian is a syllabic language. The cuneiform symbols each represent a syllable, and so you get these pieces to names. If you listen to it, if I say this again, I think this is how and why Marduk starts to show up around this time. So if I say the names Amorite or Amor, you have the Amuru, you have the Martu, and one document I found, and I'm missing it now, but they also called the Martuduk. And then we get the god Marduk, right? So there's a syllable in the middle that comes out. This is where I'm going to get into a theory. It's not written, but I'm putting it together. I think Marduk starts to show up in writings and is compared to the other gods and even absorbs their titles because he comes from the Amorite religion. But I also think because the Amorites are listed among the giant clans, that this is a sort of spirit that's animating them in the sense of whatever's going on behind the scenes in the spiritual world to drive the Amorites. Marduk sort of represents the perfect Amorite in Babylon. And so it's sort of a personification and anthropomorphism of the spirit that's driving this giant clan. That's what I see as popping up. And this is also why, as they come into the area, sort of the balance among the deities gets shifted around. You start to hear a lot less about Shemesh or even Hadad, who is the storm god. You might recognize that from the Bible, from Baal Hadad, who is the Canaanite storm god. There as well, there's a shared idea there. You hear less about them, and then Marduk becomes really, really important. And this is where we get the Enuma Elish. And like I said before, I think this is also what's driving the fact that there's two flood accounts and two creation accounts, because you've got the old Sumerian and Akkadian stories that then are intermingled or superseded by the Amorite influence that comes into the area. Does that track? You following with me there so far?
Yeah, there's a lot of information, but I understand that, everything is important and you're slowly introducing us to something more specific little by little.
Mhm.
But I just want to say how I admire your photographic memory to just, I mean, I know you have some notes, right? All of us do, but like you're able to come up with all these names and dates and events. And I'm like, wow, like I just admire what God gave you. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a. I guess we go back into high school. I was really good at chemistry because I could actually see my pages in my notebook with the chemical formulas, and that's why I'm remembering. I can't find my resource anymore, but I remember seeing the cuneiform layout in this document of that Marduk people, and it's describing a people before it describes the god, and so this is why I think it's connected and it's a development that goes on. So part of me for not having the exact reference, and if we find it, then we can throw a note up or something like that. But I see the connection of the words, especially because it's a syllabic language, is that each of those syllables means something. So it's got to be connected. It's like a degree or two of separation, right? To me, that's what's going on. So.
Can you just, before you continue, can you please spell that word? Because it almost sounds like Slavic, like Eastern European Slavic languages.
Yeah, well, and that's why I'm forgetting exactly what it is. But if I get it right, it's something close to Marduk.
No, I mean the word you said in one of the, you said, I think, Slavic languages, right?
Oh, so yeah. So what I mean by that is each character in these languages represents a syllable, right? So it's
Hmm.
a combination of letters already. It's not like English or Greek or like Latinized languages where we have A, B, and then we could put A and B together to be ab or ba. Is that each character has a syllable it represents. So let's say the name Marduk, if I remember right, it's two characters put together. So one character would be Mar and one would be Duke. Enlil is En and Lil. Gilgamesh, I believe, is three. Gilgamesh, right? That's how it works. That's a syllabic language as opposed to a character driven language.
Okay, because when you say, okay, the way you said it fast almost sound like Slavic, because I'm coming
Right.
from a Slavic group of languages, and I'm like, I was just confused. How is that related Eastern Europe
Yeah.
with Middle East? But now I understand.